And we're back with our Hump Day edition of Let's Talk. It's Wednesday, heading downhill to the weekend, which kind of looks like it might be a good weekend. So that's great weather-wise. Well, we're very honored this morning to have with us our United States Representative Harriet Hageman, and Miss Hageman, you've been pretty busy with a lot of town halls, and you're starting another series of them again. And tonight you'll be up in Du Bois.
Yes, I will. When I ran for office, I promised that I would come back and do a town hall in every county every year. Last year, I finished that by the end of June, and then this year, I'm on track to do 12 by the end of this week. So last night we were in Rollins, and tonight we will be in Du Bois from 5:30 to 6:30, and then on Saturday we'll be in Worland and Thermopolis, and then I'll head home to Cheyenne after that, and then the next day I fly back to Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and the Du Bois meeting is at the National Museum of Military Vehicles just outside of Du Bois.
It is such a beautiful facility. We're so fortunate in Wyoming to have that.
You know, for people who haven't been there, it is just an amazing, it's a Smithsonian quality facility up there.
It truly is, and it is the only military vehicle museum of its type, I believe, in the entire world. So again, it's such an honor that Wyoming has something like that. Dan Starks has done such a beautiful job of curating and obtaining the history of military vehicles and weapons of all sorts. Plus, then that gives you the history of war, the history of World War I and World War II and the Vietnam War. It's essentially the only museum to our Vietnam War veterans. And so it's, again, it's a fabulous place. I encourage people to go visit.
Yeah, and on the 4th of July, you'll have to come back and ride one of the tanks in the parade.
I would enjoy that.
Yeah, I bet you would. Well, you're a little over halfway through your first term in Congress. How's it been?
It has been exciting. It has been eye-opening in many ways. It's been an incredible honor to be able to represent the state of Wyoming. I am so proud of where I come from. I love my state. I love having an opportunity to do these town halls. I meet with people all the time in Wyoming when I'm home, but town halls are kind of a special event for me because it gives me an opportunity. What I typically do is talk for maybe 20, 25 minutes, giving an overview and a summary of what we've been doing, and then I open it up to questions. And I feel so strongly about the importance of us being a republic, not a democracy, the republic being a representative form of government. And I don't know really how to represent the folks of Wyoming unless I'm personally interacting with them. And that's what town halls allow me to do.
Well, that's just great. Now, you just recently passed or introduced a bill with Senator Lummis about the Postal Act. The United States Postal Service wants to move all the mail processing out of Wyoming to Billings and or Denver.
Well, we're very frustrated with this. We have been trying to meet with the Postmaster General for quite some time, and our office has reached out multiple times to the U.S. Post Office to obtain additional information about what their plan of action is. We've been extremely dissatisfied in the amount of information they've been willing to provide and the detail. So we just introduced what's called the Postal Act, and essentially what it requires is that that the U.S. Postal Service cannot close a distribution center if it is the last distribution center in that state. So what the U.S. Postal Service is trying to do is send our mail to Salt Lake City, to Billings, and to Denver for processing, which is going to be devastating to be able to provide medication for our veterans, a lot of whom receive their meds through the mail. It's going to affect our elections in the primary and in November because it could take 10 to 14 days for mail to be processed out of state and then brought back in. So logistically, they have never provided sufficient information, and so we're pushing forward with the Postal Act. I actually think there will be bipartisan support because there are Democrats who also do not want to see their distribution centers closed. So hopefully we can get this blocked. This is something that at every single town hall I have attended, this issue has come up for people. They're very concerned about Wyoming losing its distribution center.
Well, I get my mail in Pavilion, and, it goes to Casper now and then comes back. And there is that delay, which is really frustrating.
In Jackson, they don't really have anything but post office box delivery right now. So they've already cut back dramatically in Jackson. And I can tell you, we receive complaints about that. And I don't blame for people for being upset. My mother is over 100 years old, and she writes letters. And she has written thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of letters over her lifetime. And that is the way that she has always interacted with people. And for someone like that, it really does impact her ability to communicate. I would also say that I think that this is an example of a government that when the government starts doing things that it should not do, it becomes incapable of doing the things that it should. And you look at U.S. history, and going back to the Pony Express, providing postal services has been a foundational service that our government has provided to us. And because it is now involved in so many things it shouldn't be, it's giving up on those basic things that create society and create a cohesive government.
Well, of course, Wyoming was a route of the Pony Express, and the mail delivery was slow. Of course, it was going out to the West Coast, but we have a fear of that same thing happening without the Pony Express when they move these facilities out of the state.
The more that technology advances, in some ways, we seem to go backwards. And that's why these processing and distribution facilities are so important. So I've also been in contact with our Postal Service employees here in Wyoming and had an opportunity to visit with many of them. And they're terribly concerned because they're essentially being told, we're going to move you out of Wyoming, and you either agree to be moved elsewhere or you're going to lose your job. These are Wyoming natives. These are people who chose to come to Wyoming because they love it here. They don't want to leave. And the U.S. Postal Service is forcing them out, which is also a secondary tragedy of this.
Yeah. Well, this has been a pretty controversial congressional session with the aid to Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan. And I know you supported Israel, but not Ukraine. And what was the purpose for that?
Well, you're right. It has been controversial. And one of the challenges that we have with Ukraine specifically is that Congress cannot get an accounting of how the money is being spent. Over $120 billion has already been spent to Ukraine. We know a substantial portion of that has never made it to the front lines. It is being used for paying for their government services, their trash collection, their education, their pensions. $300 million of the amount of money that is going to Ukraine is for their border security and drug interdiction. Yet we don't get border security here in the United States. And that was always one of the things that the Republicans said in the House is we have to tie border security to Ukraine because this administration has been such a failure when it comes to border security. So that's one of the issues. But the other issue that we have is whenever you're going to war or funding a war, as we seem to be, you have to understand what your end goal is. What is the ultimate outcome? How do you see this ending? We can't go through another never-ending war. And besides which, Ukraine can't survive a never-ending war. The average age of the military men in the Ukrainian military right now is 43 years old, which demonstrates that we've lost an entire generation of young men. There has to be some discussion about what is the ultimate outcome here. And again, the Biden administration will give us no information. As far as Taiwan, I'm also concerned about that, but that's also not a pressing issue when you consider the fact that we're borrowing every single dime that we're sending to these foreign countries. Another aspect of the Taiwan funding is that if President Biden were to decide to do so, he could claw a portion of that back and give it to Ukraine, again, with no congressional oversight and no accountability. As far as the Israeli funding, I actually believe that Israel is the tip of the spear for protecting Western civilization right now. What happened on October 7th was barbaric beyond anything any of us could have imagined in our lifetimes. What's going on with Iran? Iran has been a thorn in the side of the United States since 1979. And at some point, there is going to be a catastrophe that comes out of Iran. And we're seeing it play out in Israel. So I think all three of those various tranches of money and philosophy and policy are different. They shouldn't have been packaged together. They should have been debated separately, voted on separately, and in the Senate as well as the House, so that the American people know exactly what we're doing and why.
Well, we're having a lot of controversies in some of our major universities right now with the Palestinian protests. The Israelis lost, 1,400 people in that raid on October 7th?
Yes.
And over 50,000, mostly women and children, have been killed in Israel, and that's hard for a lot of people to understand.
Well, it is. I don't know the numbers about what are coming out of Gaza because those are primarily coming from Hamas.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
they have not been able to substantiate the numbers, and they also don't differentiate between the terrorists and the civilians that are being killed. But I read a very interesting article the other day about Hamas specifically. This is one of the first times in world history where a warring nation is actually using its civilians as the front line of defense, that they are intentionally putting their civilians in harm's way and intentionally hoping that their civilians are the ones that are harmed or killed so that they can have this, what you're seeing on these college campuses, which is this uproar about Israel doing terrible things. So when you think about it, when you think about what Hamas is doing, is they're putting the women and children on the front line or their civilians, and when something happens, then they turn around and blame Israel. You think about what happened during World War II. You think about what happened during Vietnam and World War I. The world leaders sought to protect their civilians. They sought to make sure that they didn't have that type of catastrophe and the impact on their civilian population. Hamas is doing exactly the opposite so that they can engender and create this kind of crisis that you're seeing on our university campuses. I support Elise Stefanik, the chairman of our conference. I think she's done a wonderful job. She's from New York. She has written letters to the Department of Education and the Department of Civil Rights in the Department of Justice, demanding that they stop funding Columbia University and New York State University until they resolve their anti-Semitism and what they're doing with this. So I support Elise in doing that. I think that those are very good points that she's making. But what we're constantly attacked when we're back in Washington, D.C. by these pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian people. And I keep saying to them, what does Hamas say about a ceasefire? Because they're the ones that really control this. But right now they're attempting to maximize civilian casualties so that they believe that eventually they can get the world on their side. I think that that's sick. I think it's horrible policy, and I will not stand up. I will not stand there and support something like that.
Do you think we'll ever get the hostages back?
I don't know the answer to that. But it breaks my heart. I've met with the parents and family members several times, including within about a week or 10 days after this happened. We met with several of the mothers in Washington, D.C., and it was one of the most heart-wrenching meetings I've ever had. I also watched the film. The members of Congress were invited to watch the 47-minute film that shows much greater detail what happened on October 7th. I will never be able to unsee that. I felt that I needed to go watch that. They had to go through it. And as a political and policy leader in the country, I felt it was my obligation to see it, but I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Yeah, it was pretty horrific.
It was pretty horrific.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How about Netanyahu? Do you think he can survive this?
I think that he will, at least in the interim. I don't know in the long term what will happen with that. I have great questions, which many people do, as to how October 7th was able to play out the way that it did. One of the things that I have read about it is that they used very, very low-tech communication.
Yes,
You know, as we were saying a moment ago, the more high-tech we get, the more we seem to go backwards. They were using written pieces of paper. They did not use cell phones. They were communicating person to person to person. And what they were doing is they were actually weakening some of the hardened infrastructure that Israel had in place by having or staging riots, and they would have people in there working on those fences to loosen them, to make them so that they would be easier to breach. And the Israelis were not really paying attention to the fact that they were actually affecting and weakening the infrastructure at the time that they were doing this. So this was a long time in the planning. I believe that it was well over 2 years. We know that Iran is behind it. We know that Iran helped to plan it and funded it and gave the okay of when to go forward with it. So again, Iran with its dirty hands, and I don't mean the Iranian people, but I do mean the mullahs and the leadership that has been there since the coup in 1979.
Yeah.
So it's bad.
What's been your most pleasant experience being in Congress for a year and a half?
Working with the people that I do. I have an incredible staff. I love my staff and the people that I get to work with and their dedication to Wyoming and the policies that are important to me and important to our state. So I am fortunate that every single day I get to go to work with people either in D.C. or here in Wyoming that are just a true joy to work with. the people that I work with in Congress. I know that there's some frustration, and this last Saturday was kind of a rough day for those of us who did believe we ought to be spending another $95 billion. But at the same time, I have worked well with leadership over the last year and a half. I have been fortunate to be on the Judiciary Committee with Jim Jordan. I'm on the Natural Resources Committee with Bruce Westerman. I'm the chairman of the subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs. That has just been a true highlight over the last 15 months to learn about and work on issues that are so important to Indian country, including right here in this community, addressing healthcare, addressing law enforcement issues, addressing education, just addressing the things, the property issues that are so important to our tribal members. That is just that has been an honor of a lifetime to be able to do that. And just, sometimes we're going to disagree. And in the Republican conference especially, you have a very broad spectrum of views and viewpoints. And so you're going to have some knockdown, drag out things every once in a while. But at the same time, I think the vast majority in the Republican conference want to move this country in the right direction, which does include we're going to have to start cutting spending. We're going to have to recognize that the federal government is not the be-all and end-all of everything. We are going to have to get common sense back into our energy policy, because right now what's coming out of the White House is failed energy policy resulting in energy poverty, and I disagree with that. So just the opportunity to work with people from around the United States, including leadership, that I think while we may sometimes disagree, I think we're all trying to come out of this to make America stronger and, again, that bright, shining city on the hill.
Well, moving back to the Wind River Reservation, you had this a bill that would lengthen the lease time from 25 years to 50 years, and that would help spur some economic development. A lot of folks won't take a 25-year lease if they're going to make a major investment.
I thank you for asking me about that, because that's something I'm extremely proud of, and it's a bill that I introduced very early. Right now, federal law restricts our tribes and tribal members from leasing their trust lands, primarily their reservations, from leasing their trust lands for longer than 25 years. Well, that substantially impacts economic development, because you may not have a convenience store or a grocery store or a restaurant or a distillery or whatever it might be, are not going to move in on a reservation with the hard infrastructure that they have to build with a 25-year lease. But if they have the option of working with the tribes to actually do a 50-year or 75 or even 99, that will spur more economic development. Now, the tribes don't have to lease for longer than 25 years under my bill, but it gives them that opportunity. We had some tribes come in and testify on this bill very early on, and one tribe testified that they had had a petition to lease their land for longer than 25 years pending before the Secretary of Interior, in one case for 14 years and in another case for 22 years. In other words, the process to allow for longer term leasing that goes through the Secretary of Interior is just really broken. And I'm frustrated with that, because I want our tribes to have the autonomy and sovereignty that they need to make good decisions for their members. And so we introduced a bill that tribes can lease their lands for up to 99 years without having to seek Secretary of Interior approval.
Well, that should speed things along.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked about the border yet, but I know you have some pretty strong feelings there.
Well, I do, and I've been down there 3 times. I've been to the Yuma sector, I've been to Eagle Pass, Texas, and then just 2 months ago I was down in the Tucson sector. Just to give you an idea of the uniqueness of each of those sectors and to kind of identify some of the challenges in each of them, I'll start with Tucson. 2 years ago, there were 70,000 people who crossed illegally in that sector. This year it will be 800,000. And keep in mind that if these folks do not come through a port of entry, they cannot seek asylum. So when they're crossing the border the way that they are, even if they receive a notice to appear 12 years down the road, they are never going to be entitled to asylum. So this entire thing is a sham and a scam in terms of what the Biden administration is doing. For Eagle Pass, Texas, just in that one sector, the cartels are making $32 to $35 million a week in human trafficking. That equates to $1.6 billion a year in just that one sector. When we went down there, the day before we were there, they were processing 5,000 people a day through the Eagle Pass sector. When we were there were only 165 because the Biden administration had gotten a hold of the cartels and said, don't send people across. We've got members of Congress who are coming through. As far as Yuma goes, I went and met with a lot of different groups down there, but one of them were the farmers. And that was the one that probably broke my heart the most because these farmers are being put out of business. During certain times a year, the majority of our fruit and vegetables comes from Yuma. They have fabulous farms down there and irrigation systems, celery, cauliflower, broccoli, onions, just all kinds of fruits and vegetables. And they're being put out of business because they're overseen by the FDA. And as people are going through these fields, they're having to destroy huge amounts, huge swaths of crops. In some cases, not even planting anymore. So all of these things are coming together. We've got human trafficking, we've got drug smuggling, we've got devastation to our food supply. We've enriched the cartels and encouraged their lawlessness. It is a humanity crisis, the likes of which I've never seen. It is absolutely inhumane. The DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and HHS have lost over 85,000 unaccompanied children in the last 3 years that they cannot account for, that are being sold into slavery here in our own country, and child pornography and drug running and all of the different things. It is a crisis that is so much bigger than most people understand, and it is all intentional.
There was a bill, a bipartisan bill, to fix the border here, 6 months ago?
H.R. 2.
Yeah, and it was rejected by the Republican Congress, the
No,
House
the
of
Senate.
Representatives.
No, we had one. Oh, you're talking about the Senate bill.
Yep.
But that wasn't a border security bill. H.R. 2 is the House version of the bill. That's a border security bill. The Senate bill was not a border security bill. It was a processing bill. And in fact, it allowed between 5,500 and 8,000 illegals to cross a day, every single day. And even then, if President Biden determined that more needed to cross, that there was a crisis on the border, that they needed to be processing people more faster, he could actually increase that number. So they were looking at a minimum of over 5,000 people a day, up to 8,000 people a day coming through that for processing. So what that bill did is it funded a lot more processing centers, but it didn't do anything to actually secure the border. So there wasn't any way in the world that I ever would have voted for that. The other thing is that even that limit of the 5,500 to 8,000 a day, that sunsetted in 2025. So it would only be in place during an election year. And even then, within a matter of months, the number of people crossing illegally would exceed the population of the state of Wyoming. So that was not a border security bill at all. It was misnamed and a misnomer. It was a processing of illegals bill. There were also amnesty provisions in there. That was a very bad bill, very bad policy. H.R. 2 is the best border security bill that's ever been passed.
Is anyone paying attention to our northern border?
Yes, and we've got the issues coming across there as well. What you see on the northern border is people flying into Canada and walking across. We do know that there are substantial issues, and it is slowly increasing over time. And I think as weather gets nicer, you're going to see even more people crossing on the northern border. So yes, we have the same issues on the northern border. It's just not of the same magnitude.
Yeah, a lot smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Are you going to run for re-election?
Yes, I am. I have announced that I was running for re-election, and that I announced, I think, in January or February. I'd have to go back and look. But yes, I enjoy
short-term memory.
I enjoy representing the state of Wyoming. I am honored to be able to do that. I often tell people that everyone in Congress is very jealous of me because I get to represent Wyoming. People in Congress love my state, and I think that they look at Wyomingites as kind of a throwback to a different era, but not in a bad way. Individualism, family, ruggedness, independence, self-sufficiency. That's just kind of the way they look at our state, and they know how beautiful it is. So a lot of people in Congress come to Wyoming on vacation and different meetings and pack trips and fundraisers. And so, yes.
Each member of Congress has offices throughout the state. Where are your offices here in Wyoming?
I have an office in Cheyenne and an office in Casper. And then what we do and what we made the decision to do was we wanted to spend our money and focusing on having my staff in Wyoming traveling around the state. So we do what are called Congresses in your community, Congress in your community. And that's where my staff members will go to Du Bois or to Worland or to Newcastle or to Evanston and set up for a day or maybe a day and a half. And we let people know when it's going to be. And you can come in and talk to them about if you've got a problem with the IRS, if you've got a problem with the veteran, the VA, whatever it might be. We've returned over $2 million to the citizens of Wyoming. Just in the last year, we were able to get $2 million returned to the citizens of Wyoming that the federal government had been wrongfully withholding through a variety of agency actions, whether it was the IRS refusing to do a refund or a settlement agreement that they refused to pay, whatever it might be. But we returned over $2 million to the citizens of Wyoming.
Congresswoman, it's been a pleasure to have you here on the air today. We look forward to seeing you again.